Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Dancing Professor. On today's episode, we're going to discuss another common technique of methodology used in human factors, the heuristic evaluation. As an overview, we're going to first begin by talking about what a heuristic evaluation is. We're going to understand the main goals of a heuristic evaluation and how it differs from a laboratory study. We're going to talk about the target audience and participants involved in this type of method, as well as the materials that go into conducting a heuristic evaluation. We're going to wrap up the conversation by talking about how the results of such an evaluation could be interpreted. After that, I'm going to tell you how you can conduct your own heuristic evaluation, and we're going to go through those things step by step, such as creating user flows, evaluating those flows based on heuristics, recording those results, and who to present them to. So what is a heuristic evaluation? A heuristic evaluation is defined as finding usability problems in interface design based on compliance with specific usability heuristics, or principles and rules of thumb. The main goal of a heuristic evaluation is to uncover a variety of usability problems. Heuristic evaluations typically involve the expertise of researchers and/or engineers who know the product space very well, which is why we call them experts. The effectiveness of such an evaluation is improved if there are 3 to 5 experts reviewing the product at the same time. Heuristic evaluations differ from laboratory studies, but should not be used in place of them. So typically, issues that are uncovered in a heuristic evaluation are addressed, and then once those issues are addressed, then the product will go into laboratory testing in a usability lab, however many times as necessary. It is unlikely for heuristic evaluation for a product to occur more than once, but usability testing is definitely a cyclical process. So heuristic evaluations do not involve participants. In this case, the researcher or the expert user acts as the participant or as the user. Heuristic evaluations do not allow for qualitative feedback from users, however. So if you think back to our previous lecture on usability studies, in a usability study you have one researcher with one participant for about an hour of time talking in depth about a particular product and various tasks that a user can complete on that product. During that study, the researcher is observing the user, counting the number of errors or mistakes they make, analyzing how long it takes them to complete a particular task. And the great thing about that is that you can as the researcher, you can actually ask the participant to explain their behavior and ask them why they were challenged by particular steps in the process. In a heuristic evaluation, you cannot do that because, again, the researcher is the only participant. And so observations in a heuristic evaluation are recorded in terms of violations to the heuristics that we will be talking about versus observed human behavior that you see in a usability study. So there are several different ways to conduct heuristic evaluations. A very common method was founded by Nielsen and Method in 1990, and it is often used in industry today. So here we have a list, a sort of graphic representation with icons and small captions to explain the 10 heuristics that Nielsen had introduced, and we will talk about them in greater detail as we move forward through our lecture. So, target audience and participants. It is always a good idea to understand who will be the target audience for this product prior to starting the evaluation. Now, the target audience is developed based on a participant profile. The participant profile is typically given to you by the stakeholder, the client, the product manager, whoever is commissioning your help for this research. So some of the things that define a participant profile are: what are the characteristics of the main users or consumers of this product? What age range do they fall in? And what kind of experience should they have, if any, with this or similar products? Again, in a heuristic evaluation, the researcher is taking on the role of the user or of the participant, and therefore he or she must be an expert in this domain. Now, you don't have to necessarily be a researcher or have a degree in human factors or anything in order to be considered an expert user of something. So if we think of people, for example, who work at electronics stores such as Fry's or Best Buy, those people interact with technology products on a daily basis for several hours a day. They probably deal with customer service. They probably deal with fixing particular products of technology. So all of these things make them an expert in their domain. So someone like that could also be a valid candidate to be an expert reviewer for a heuristic evaluation. Again, no participants are used in this method, but to ensure inter-rater reliability, about 3 to 5 researchers usually work on the same project together. So how this works is all the researchers conduct a heuristic review on their own in isolation to avoid any sort of biased evaluations. And after each researcher completes his or her review, then they meet and they pool their results together and compare who had found what. So research shows that more usability issues are surfaced when researchers work alone and then combine their results later, as opposed to having all of the researchers work on all of the tasks at the same time. So most often, about 80% of usability issues are uncovered in a heuristic review, again with data from about 3 to 5 reviewers. So what are some of the materials that we need to conduct a heuristic evaluation? Well, the experts who are conducting the review do not really need any special materials. The researchers often make a spreadsheet or some sort of a table to record the heuristic violations, and each violation should be explained in terms of user needs. So essentially, how does the particular violation create a negative user experience? How does it hinder the usability of a product? So no recording or videotaping equipment is necessary, but you will be able to provide screenshots or videos of the particular flows that you would go through. So the table that we were just talking about might look something like this. So for example, in the first column, you have a task. The tasks will be identified when we create our user flows, and we'll get more information about that shortly. After the task, you would explain the problem you encountered. For example, if your task is to log into a particular app and it's difficult to find the login button because it's too small or it's obstructed by something, that would be a problem. Login button is not visible. The heuristic that could be violated would have to apply to the particular problem, and of course we will define all of those heuristics momentarily. And then in terms of location, you could explain which step in the process actually has this problem. If it's the very beginning, if it's the login, then that could be step 1. Or you could explain where on the screen the button is located and call out why it's difficult to find. And then the last column is probably the most important. Why could this matter to the intended user? So if the way that you need to operate a particular product or app in this instance, and you cannot do it without logging in, well then that's obviously a huge problem for the intended user, because then the whole program becomes inoperable. So that's just an example of how you could fill in one of these lines on your chart. So interpreting these results, right? After the researchers identify all the usability issues, once again defined in terms of violations similar to the chart we just saw, then they need to suggest recommendations for how to improve the product. Now, most violations are a result of an incomplete or poor design, meaning in some instances, a product has to be designed quickly and developed so it can get marketed, it can get pushed out the door, it can get promoted, and designers don't always have all of the time in the world to work on their particular interface. So what happens is that a design becomes incomplete. Sometimes designers spend more time on one aspect of the program versus on another, and the part that has been focused on less will probably surface more usability issues. A poor design would be that it is causing the user to make errors. If we think back, historically to World War II with the aircraft, right? Human error was caused by design error. So in some instances, the mental model or the thought process that a designer may follow is completely different from that of a user, which is why we have usability testing. So sometimes the design completely needs to be changed in order for the task to be operable. Recommendations typically involve suggesting ways to the design team how to redesign the existing interface. And after the product has been successfully redesigned, it is then typically tested in a usability lab study over and over and over until all of the usability issues, are eliminated. So the collection of findings and recommendations are aggregated into a report for product teams to reference as a guide for their product later in the future. So now that we have a clear understanding of what a heuristic evaluation is, let's actually try to see how we could conduct one on our own. The first step to conducting a heuristic evaluation is to identify your experts. A strong evaluation will result in the review of at least 3 to 5 researchers. And again, They don't always have to be researchers, they just have to be very, very knowledgeable in this particular domain. So each researcher identifies usability issues on their own. Then those results are pooled together and analyzed. So it's very likely that one person might find something that another person did not find, right? And of course, there will be overlaps and similarities. So the beauty of conducting a heuristic evaluation separately and then as a group is that you really increase the amount of findings that are surfaced. The second step is really, really important, and it is to create user flows. So what is a flow? A flow is essentially a process. Most heuristic evaluations are conducted on products when the product team has specific user journeys that they want to address. So what is a user journey? A user journey is a common flow or process that users follow to accomplish a particular task. Now we know that technology has been created to enhance our lives, to make it better, to make it more interesting. But with the addition of so many features, right, we know that the usability sometimes suffers, right? The simplicity of these designs can become hindered. So while we know that various products or various programs and softwares can accomplish a lot of things and a lot of tasks, it's virtually impossible to conduct a heuristic evaluation on every single function that a program has. So that is why heuristic evaluations are very time consuming, and it's important to the researcher to sync with the product team to ask them which journeys are most important to them and evaluate only those tasks or journeys. Because again, you don't have enough time, time is not infinite. Typically when you're conducting research for a particular team, you have a deadline. So you really want to make sure that you are on the same page with them and you understand which particular use cases, which tasks, which journeys, which flows are the most important for you to evaluate. So the user flows are typically shown using videos or screenshots to indicate the steps a user goes through to accomplish the task. Again, in the usability lab study, you would be videotaping and recording all of these things, but when you're doing a heuristic evaluation, it's important to document this as well. So let's consider an example from an existing product. Let's take YouTube as a product and the task, find a way to save a video that you might want to watch later. So the scenario could be someone sends you a video or you're surfing the app while you're waiting at the DMV, for example, and then suddenly your number gets called and you're like, oh, I really want to watch that video, but I don't have time right now. So what's a way that I could bookmark it or save it so that I could access it later? So this is an example of what a user flow might look like. Again, this is definitely on a mobile phone, so we're using the YouTube app. So step one would be something like you open your homepage and you see that you really liked the movie Burlesque with Cher and Christina Aguilera, and now clips from the movie have come out and you really want to watch it. But again, your number got called at the DMV, you can't watch it right now, so what would you do? So you click on it, right? As soon as it starts playing, you realize, oh my God, I can't watch it right now. What do I do? How do I find a way to save it to watch later? So one possible process would be that the user would tap here on this icon that says Add To. Once the user taps on Add To, it displays a menu with options Create New Playlist, Watch Later, Favorites, and Cancel. So the user, of course, wants to watch later, so they would tap that. Once the user taps Watch Later, a toast notification appears here at the bottom, and it says a confirmation message added to Watch Later, and then a call to action that says See List. If the user taps on See List, they land on their Watch Later section. So this is showing all of the videos in a playlist format that the user has actually saved to watch later. So this particular task had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. Actually a logical follow-up question to this would be, how would the user then locate their watch later content? So typically, if you've added it to watch later, you're not immediately going to look at it once you've added it. So you would, think of the scenario like, okay, I finished my appointment at the DMV. Now I have time to actually go back and watch the video I wanted to watch. So typically, if you close your app and you reopen it again, once again, you land on the home page. So where on this home page would you click to get to the Watch Later section? And if you remember, the only way we got here is by clicking on See List after we had recently added a video there. But how do we actually get there from the regular homepage? So that could be a follow-up task to this. And of course, for that follow-up task, you would repeat the same flow description for each task. And it's a good idea in your heuristic evaluation to make sure that you provide a caption for the audience to understand where you are at each step in the process. So after you've created flows for all of the journeys or tasks, each of them have to now be evaluated. But each step of every task must be evaluated according to Nielsen's 10 heuristics, which we will go over momentarily. Some tasks may have more steps. Those would probably take longer. And some steps may have more violation than others. So if we look at it, going back to this example, here we had 5 different steps. So what we would do is we would analyze the first step with all of Nielsen's 10 heuristics. So does this particular step violate any of those 10? After you complete that, you go to the second step. Does this screen or this step violate any of those 10 heuristics? Then you would do the same 10 heuristics on the third screen, on the fourth screen, and on the fifth screen. Right? So however many steps, you got to multiply that times 10 because you got to do the 10 heuristics for each step. So you can imagine how much time this actually ends up taking. So now let's talk about, each heuristic in a little bit more detail to make sure you guys understand some examples of violations. So the first one is visibility of system status. The system should always keep users informed about what is going on through appropriate feedback within reasonable time. So an example of this, I don't know if you've ever tried to open a web page, or perhaps you were interacting with some mobile app and you were clicking on something and absolutely nothing was happening. Perhaps the system was loading, perhaps there was an error, perhaps the button was inactive. Regardless, you were not receiving any sort of feedback from the system that it was registering what you were doing, your action. That is a violation of this heuristic, when the system is not providing any sort of feedback to the user about what is going on. The second one, match between system and the real world. The system should speak the user's language with words, phrases, and concepts similar to the user, rather than system-oriented terms. So in the world of technology, right, designers tend to fixate on particular terminology. Sometimes we use acronyms, that may not be understandable to a user outside of this domain. So we want to make sure that any labels, any titles, anything that is descriptive doesn't use any words that are not layman's terms and would not be understood by someone who is not an expert user. User control and freedom says that users often choose system functions by mistake and will need a clearly marked emergency exit to leave the unwanted state without having to go through an extended dialogue. So support things like undo and redo. If you think about the Pandora Music app, for example, there are 2 buttons, thumbs up and thumbs down, which essentially do different things. Yes, they provide information and feedback to the algorithm in terms of the suggestions that they make for you. However, they could also add things to your library or to your stations. So sometimes if you like a song, right, you'll tap on the thumbs up. But what if while it's playing you accidentally click on the thumbs down? With the invention of the touch screen, and some touch screens are very, very sensitive, it's very common for users to make errors, as they're interacting with the device, and they might hit, the thumbs down button and remove it from their content. So having a button like undo is probably very desirable in an instance like that. Another example is when you're trying to copy paste text, right, in a word processor or Google Docs or any text program. Sometimes we hit a button while it's highlighted and all of the text disappears. How do we bring it back? So Command Z, right, a undo button often helps that. But if a particular system does not have such a button, then that would be a violation of user control and freedom. Consistency and standards is another common commonly violated one, users should not have to wonder whether different words, situations, or actions mean the same thing. So if you have an icon that means mute, for example, on an interface, don't have another icon that also means mute. So you want to keep things consistent throughout the app, not only throughout the screen. So error prevention, even better than good error message, is a careful design which prevents problems from occurring in the first place. So either eliminate error-prone conditions or check for them and present users with the confirmation option before they commit to the action. This is really important if you think about things like online shopping, right? So anything that requires a financial commitment from you, that interface probably should have some sort of a confirmation button to prevent a purchase in error. So you can only imagine that if you were browsing something and unless you went through, confirmatory messages to confirm the purchase, next thing you know, you get shipped something that you never ordered, you simply just looked at, maybe by accident on the touch screen, you hit purchase. You should definitely have some other sort of confirmation messages asking you if that's in fact what you want to do. Recognition rather than recall is actually a concept that is familiar to us from cognitive psychology. And again, we don't want to overload a user's memory, right? We want to make sure that the user can access important information without having to memorize it. And so instructions should be very visible or easily retrievable. Flexibility and efficiency of use. Accelerators, unseen by the novice user, may often speed up the interaction for the expert user, such that the system can cater to both the inexperienced and experienced users. So we want to allow people to have shortcuts. So for example, if you are someone that types a lot, you would probably copy and paste. Instead of having to go through the top menu, selecting copy or right click, you start to learn about shortcut keys like Command C, Command V, various other combinations to create screen captures on your computers. All of those things are shortcuts, right, which we can call accelerators, which are very helpful in a design, not so much necessary. However, those accelerators should not get in the way of the inexperienced user flow to actually copy or paste that same text. So flexibility and efficiency of use is sort of like a really great bonus feature, and it's not seen as a very common violation. However, aesthetic and minimalist design is a common violation. So dialogues should not contain information which is irrelevant or rarely needed. Every extra unit of information in a dialogue competes with the relevant units of information and diminishes their relative visibility. So in our attention chapter, we learned that our attention is limited, and perception is dictated by our attention. So essentially, if a designer wants someone to see something important on their interface, they probably shouldn't clutter it with too many visuals. They probably shouldn't clutter it with too much text. Even, when I create my PowerPoint presentations for you guys, I always keep that in mind. I don't want to overload you with information because I don't want you to miss out on the information that's important because you're fixating somewhere else. So a violation of aesthetic and minimalist design occurs a lot because we're always trying to show the users all the amazing things that a particular product can do, but we need to be very cautious of the fact that we can't hide the main functions of that product with all of these extra features. Next, we have help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. Error messages should be expressed in plain language, not codes, not saying error 143 system 0125. No, just precisely indicate the problem and constructively suggest a solution. So sometimes when you're inputting information online, when you're trying to order something or filling out an application, and maybe you enter the address and it's spelled incorrectly, and then you try to continue to the next screen, and you constantly get put back on the same screen. Perhaps it will highlight in red something that's showing you that there is an error, but if it doesn't tell you like address not found, or maybe check the address, maybe you spelled something wrong. But constantly just being presented with the same screen over and over without really understanding what the problem is would be a violation of this particular heuristic. And last but not least, we have help and documentation. Even though it is better if the system can exist without documentation, it may be necessary to provide help once in a while, right? Any information related to help should be easy to search, focused on the user's task, and list concrete steps for the solution to be carried out. So if you think about any sort of digital interface, right, they typically come with some sort of an instruction manual. But how often is it that we carry around the instruction manual while we're walking around with this digital device? So typically within the device or within the program or the software or the interface, typically within there somewhere lies some sort of a help feature. On websites, we see it a lot. There's like a very clear help button or contact us button or customer service. But once you start interacting with mobile devices or, cameras or whatnot, items of technology that should have some sort of built-in menu for help information, that's where we see violations to this sort of thing. So you don't want to have an app with a really buried help tab. You want to make sure that it's something on the main screen, right next to your account settings name, and then a help menu should appear right there. So now going back to our YouTube example, let's try to evaluate some of these steps. Our first step was that the user opens the home page and selects a video that he or she wants to watch. What you would do is go through all 10 heuristics for the step 1, and you want to record all the violations in that observation chart of yours. So if we look at this screen and we go through all of Nielsen's 10 heuristics, we might find some violations, we might not. Some steps may not have any violations, and that is the result of a very good design. But again, not every step of every process of every task is going to have a great design. And that's why it's important to evaluate each step, not only each task. So please don't feel like every step has to have 25 heuristic violations. That's absolutely not the case. So in this case, we haven't really done anything. We only just opened the app and we found a song or a video that we wanted to watch. So step 2 was that the user would tap on the Add To button. Again, you would go through all 10 heuristics for that step and record the violations in your observation chart. So one observation that I made was that some people actually want to click into the 3-dot menu to find the option for Watch Later instead of clicking on Add To. The violation here is with consistency and standards. Common with all Google products and pretty much how all interfaces work today, anything that you want to access an additional menu or some extra options for the page that you're on, those typically live in this 3-dot menu right here. However, Watch Later would not appear there. Watch Later would appear here by clicking in Add To. So the user need here, or the problem here would be that because extra menu options are usually found in the 3-dot menu, users may navigate there to find the option to watch later and not understand that they would need to click on Add To. Naturally, if they would click into the 3-dot menu and not find it there, they would begin looking elsewhere on the interface, and most likely they would find that Add To button. Does it mean that they didn't complete the task? No. Does it mean that it was impossible? No. But it probably took more time. They may have gotten frustrated. So all of these things we need to take into consideration, and we want to find the ultimate and the perfect user flow and the easiest path for them to follow. We want to make sure that there are no other tap targets that they would logically tap into based on any particular expectations. It's very logical and likely that they would tap into the 3-dot menu instead of on Add To, especially if this Add To button was a new feature. So you would do something like this for every step of every task. Are there more heuristic violations for this particular screen? It's possible that there are, but we just went through one. So after researchers have evaluated all of the tasks, they come up with a list of key insights or findings. All the findings are placed in a report or a presentation for the client, stakeholder, or product manager. And some critical features of this report would include an executive summary, an explanation of who the study was for and the main goals of the research. Then you want to explain what the participant profile is, right? Who was the target audience and who are the expert evaluators? And you don't necessarily need to list their names and last names, but you probably want to explain why you felt that they were valid experts for this particular review. The methodology. What type of methods were used? In this case, we use a heuristic evaluation. You want to include a reference to the observation chart that you have. And you have to remember that not everybody who will be part of your audience or who will be reading this report will necessarily know what a heuristic evaluation is. So you probably in your methodology section really want to explain that. Images or prototypes that were used for the evaluation. Again, you have to consider that this report is a living document, that people who will attend your presentation and then walk out of the room and would want to come back and read your report later, that they still have an understanding of the things that you looked at and the things that you evaluated. Detailed findings make up the chunk of your report, the explanation of the heuristic violations for each task, and you want to support each of these violations with specific screenshots and images calling out, similar how I showed you the Add To button was highlighted in green. Key insights, right? The list of the main themes generated across all the researchers. So after all three to five reviewers combined the results, what were the key insights? What were those main themes? And last but not least, the recommendations, right? As a researcher, it's not only your job to point out the issues, but it's also your job to come up with solutions to fix them. So now you have your report, and now it's time to let people hear about it. You always want to consider who your audience will be when presenting your study findings. They could be product managers, stakeholders, the design team, possibly engineers, and of course other researchers. All of these people have different knowledge, and it would be unwise to assume that they all know what usability research is and so on and so forth. So make sure that you speak in a way that is understandable to everyone. Avoid any statistical terminology. Avoid fixating on super minute details, right? Unless someone really asks you to go into detail about something. People in the industry are very busy. They're constantly running from one meeting to another, and they just want results quickly, and they want you to be able to tell it to them quickly. So, maintain a positive attitude when you present these usability issues and flaws. Yes, of course, the research originally was commissioned because there was a product with issues, and they've come to you and they're saying, please tell me what is wrong with this product so I can make it better. Granted, even though you do that, you want to make sure that you present this in a positive way. You want to highlight the things that you felt were really good about the product, and then you want to talk about some of the issues that came up. But what you don't want to do is come in and start negatively and, tell these people who had been working so hard on this particular product, that had spent so much time on it and are truly invested in it and truly think that it's a good design. You don't want to insult them and attack them for their perceptions of this. So keep a record of all of your reports and make these reports available to your clients and make sure that they're easily accessible. Again, the industry is a busy market. Not everyone who needed to hear your presentation was able to make it. But that's why this report is constantly a living document. People could always reference it. People should have the ability to ask you questions if they need more clarification. And basically, your report should be so thorough that people who did not attend your presentation could still follow the report and understand exactly what you did, identify the results, and those issues. So, that was sort of our crash course on heuristic evaluations. If you have any questions or comments or would like some advice on a particular evaluation that you are doing, please feel free to contact me at csundancingprofessor@gmail.com. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.